The scream that tore through the Colorado wilderness in the autumn of 1881 was not one of pain, but of absolute desperation, and it made Hawthorne Hayes pull his horse to such an abrupt stop that dust clouds swirled around them both. He had been riding toward our Ray for 3 days straight, his saddlebags heavy with the earnings from a cattle drive that had taken him clear across 2 territories. The mining town nestled in the San Juan Mountains was supposed to be his destination, a place where he could finally rest his weary bones and perhaps find work that did not involve sleeping under stars that offered no warmth. But now, sitting atop his bay mare on this narrow mountain trail, Hawthorne heard something that made every protective instinct in his body surge to life. Another scream followed, and this time he could make out words. "Please, no, take them. Just take them." Hawthorne spurred his horse forward, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. The trail curved sharply around a massive boulder, and what he saw when he cleared it made his blood run cold. A wagon had overturned, one wheel spinning lazily in the air. Supplies were scattered across the rocky ground, flour sacks torn open and their contents mixing with the dirt. But what seized his attention was the woman standing in front of the wreckage, her dress torn and dusty, her dark hair falling loose from what had once been a careful bun. She held 2 small children behind her skirts, one hand stretched out in front of her in a gesture that was both pleading and protective. 3 men on horseback surrounded her, their intentions clear from their predatory postures. They were not mountain men or even common outlaws. Their clothes marked them as drifters, the kind of men who preyed on travelers too weak to defend themselves. "We do not want your brats, lady," one of them said, his voice carrying the cruel amusement of a man who enjoyed causing fear. "We want whatever money your husband left you." "He is dead," the woman said, and her voice broke on the word. "Dead 3 days now. Fever took him. I have nothing. Nothing except these children. Please, I am begging you, take them to the next town. Leave me here. Just let them live." Hawthorne felt something crack open inside his chest. This woman was not pleading for her own life. She was trying to bargain it away for her children. He did not announce himself with words. Instead, he cocked his revolver, and the distinctive sound echoed across the mountainside like a bell tolling. All 4 people turned to look at him. The woman's eyes were wide and dark with terror, her face pale beneath the grime. The children, he could now see, were a boy of perhaps 5 and a girl who could not have been more than 3. Both had their mother's dark eyes and were clinging to her skirts with the desperate grip of the terrified. "Ride out," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone of a man who had faced death enough times to know its face intimately. Now, the 3 men exchanged glances. The one who had spoken before, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, narrowed his eyes. "This is not your business, friend." "I am not your friend," Hawthorne replied, "and I am making it my business. The lady has nothing you want. Move along." For a long moment, tension hung in the air like smoke. Hawthorne kept his revolver steady, his eyes moving between the 3 men, calculating distances and draw times. He knew that if they decided to fight, someone would die. Probably more than one person. The question was whether they thought whatever the woman might have was worth that risk. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "Not worth it," he muttered finally. "Come on." They wheeled their horses around and rode back down the trail, their departure marked by the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Hawthorne kept his gun out until they were completely out of sight, and even then, he waited several more minutes, listening for any sign they might return. When he finally holstered his weapon and dismounted, the woman collapsed. She did not faint exactly. It was more as if every muscle in her body had been held so tightly for so long that once the danger passed, they simply gave out. She sank to her knees in the dirt, pulling both children against her chest, and began to sob with the kind of abandon that spoke of days, perhaps weeks, of held-back tears. Hawthorne approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Madam," he said gently. "Madam, are you hurt?" She shook her head, but she could not seem to stop crying. The little girl had started crying too, her tiny face buried in her mother's shoulder. The boy was trying to be brave, but his lower lip trembled. "We are not safe," the woman finally managed to gasp out between sobs. "They will come back. They always come back. Please, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please take my children. Take them to our Ray. There must be someone there, a church, an orphanage, someone who will care for them. I can pay you." She fumbled at her bodice with shaking hands. "I have a little money sewn into my dress. It is not much, but it is all I have. Please just take them and leave me. If I am not with them, no one will bother them. It is me they want to hurt. Just take my babies and go." Hawthorne crouched down so he was at eye level with her. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25 at most. Her face was fine-boned and would have been beautiful if not marked by exhaustion and grief. She wore a wedding ring, thin and gold, on her left hand. "Madam," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I am not leaving you here, and I am not taking your children anywhere without you." She stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "You do not understand. I am dying. The same fever that took my husband, it has me too. I can feel it. I will not last another week. But they are young, they are strong. If you take them now, if you get them away from me, they might not catch it. They might live." Hawthorne studied her more closely. She was pale, certainly, and her eyes had the glassy brightness that sometimes accompanied fever. But he had seen plenty of fever in his 32 years, and he had also seen what grief and exhaustion could do to a person. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She blinked at him. "What? Food? When did you last have a proper meal?" I do not know. Yesterday? No, the day before." The children needed it more. "When did you last sleep?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I cannot sleep. If I sleep, something might happen to them." Hawthorne nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. "Madam, I do not think you have fever. I think you have reached the end of what a body can endure. Now, here is what we are going to do. We are going to get you and these children fed. Then we are going to right that wagon if we can, or load what can be saved onto my horse if we cannot. Then we are all going to our Ray together." "No," she said desperately. "No, you do not understand. I cannot let them stay with me. It is too dangerous. Those men, they are not the first. There have been others. Every day since Thomas died, there have been others. Men who see a woman alone and think she is easy prey. I cannot fight them all. Eventually, they will win, and if my children are with me when that happens." She could not finish the sentence. "Then it is a good thing you are not alone anymore," Hawthorne said simply. She stared at him, and in her eyes he saw the moment hope tried to kindle and was immediately smothered by fear. She had learned not to trust hope. "Why would you help us?" she whispered. "You do not know us. We are nothing to you." "You are 3 people in trouble," Hawthorne replied. "That is enough reason for me." He stood and walked to his horse, pulling down his canteen and a small pack of dried beef. When he returned, he offered them to the woman. "What is your name?" She took the canteen with trembling hands, helping first the little girl drink, then the boy, before allowing herself a small sip. "Tabitha," she said finally. "Tabitha Morgan. This is Daniel and this is Sarah." "Hawthorne Hayes," he replied. "Now, Tabitha Morgan, let us see what we can salvage from this mess." The wagon was beyond saving. The axle had cracked clean through when it overturned, and without the proper tools and materials, there was no repairing it. Hawthorne spent the better part of an hour gathering what was most essential: blankets, a few cooking implements, clothing for the children, and a small trunk that Tabitha said contained her husband's papers and a few personal items. As he worked, he learned their story in bits and pieces. Tabitha and Thomas Morgan had been traveling from Kansas, where Thomas had worked as a clerk. He had heard of opportunities in the mining towns of Colorado and had been determined to make a better life for his family. They had only been on the trail for 2 weeks when Thomas fell ill. By the time they realized it was serious, they were too far from any town to seek help. He had died in the back of the wagon, and Tabitha had buried him herself on a hillside overlooking a valley, with only her children to witness. That had been 3 days ago. She had been trying to reach Auray ever since, but the terrain was rough, and she was inexperienced with handling a team. When the wagon overturned, she had thought it was the end. "I prayed," she told Hawthorne as he secured the last of the supplies to his horse. "I prayed harder than I have ever prayed in my life, not for myself. I was ready to die, but I prayed that God would save my babies. And then you appeared." Hawthorne did not know what to say to that. He had never thought of himself as anyone's answer to prayer. He was just a cowboy who had been in the right place at the right time. "Can you ride?" he asked instead. Tabitha nodded. "I grew up on a farm. I can ride." "Good. You and Sarah will ride my horse. Daniel and I will walk alongside. Auray is about 6 miles from here. We should reach it before dark if we keep a steady pace." She looked at him with such gratitude that it was almost painful to see. "I do not know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Hawthorne said. "Let us just focus on getting there safely." The journey to Auray was slow but uneventful. Daniel proved to be a brave little soul, walking beside Hawthorne without complaint even though his short legs must have been tired. He asked questions in the way of children, his fear gradually giving way to curiosity. "Are you a real cowboy?" Daniel wanted to know. "I suppose I am," Hawthorne replied. "Do you have a gun?" "I do." "Have you ever shot anyone?" "Daniel," Tabitha called from atop the horse, her voice sharp with horror, but Hawthorne just smiled. "It is all right. Yes, Daniel, I have, but only when I had no other choice." A gun is a tool like an axe or a hammer. It should only be used when necessary. The boy considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. "Papa said violence is wrong." "Your papa was a wise man. Violence is wrong, but sometimes protecting people means using strength. The trick is knowing the difference between hurting because you want to and hurting because you must." They walked in silence for a while after that. The trail began to descend, and gradually the mountains opened up to reveal a valley below. Auray spread out before them, a collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from a distance, they could hear the sound of industry, the clang of metal on metal that marked it as a mining town. "There it is," Hawthorne said. "We made it." Tabitha made a small sound, half sob and half laugh. "I was beginning to think we never would." They reached the outskirts of town as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Hawthorne led them straight to the boarding house he knew, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson who had a reputation for being fair and honest. Mrs. Patterson took one look at Tabitha and the children and immediately went into motion. "Lord have mercy, look at you poor souls. Come in, come in. I will get water heated for baths and we will find you some proper food. Mr. Hayes, I assume you will be vouching for them." "I will," Hawthorne said. "They have had a rough time. The husband died on the trail a few days back." Mrs. Patterson's weathered face softened with sympathy. "You poor dear. Come on then, let us get you settled. I have a room on the second floor that should work just fine." As Tabitha was led away, she turned back to look at Hawthorne. "Will you be here in the morning?" He nodded. "I will be here." That night, Hawthorne sat in the small room he had rented for himself, staring at the wall and thinking about dark eyes filled with desperation. He had done the right thing, he knew that. But he also knew that his help could not end here. Tabitha Morgan was alone in a rough mining town with 2 small children and probably very little money. She had no husband, no family, and apparently no skills beyond what a farm upbringing had taught her. In a place like Auray, a woman in her position could very easily find herself in a situation far worse than an overturned wagon. He thought about riding out in the morning. His original plan had been to find work here, but that had been when he was alone. Getting involved in the Morgan family's troubles was not something he had signed up for, but when he closed his eyes, he saw Tabitha's face as she had begged him to take her children and leave her behind. He saw the way she had held them, as if her body alone could shield them from the world. He saw the spark of hope that had tried and failed to light in her eyes. Hawthorne had lost his own family when he was 19. A fever, similar to the one that had taken Thomas Morgan, had swept through his family's ranch in Texas, claiming his mother, father, and younger sister within a week of each other. He had survived along with his older brother Henry, but Henry had died 2 years later in a riding accident. Since then, Hawthorne had been alone, drifting from job to job, never staying in one place long enough to form real connections. He told himself it was because he liked the freedom. But the truth, if he was honest, was that he was afraid. Afraid of caring about people and then losing them. Afraid of building something only to watch it crumble. But fear was a poor reason to turn away from people in need. In the morning, Hawthorne found Tabitha and the children in the boarding house dining room. They looked better after a night's rest and some food. Tabitha's hair had been washed and braided neatly down her back, and someone had provided her with a clean dress. The children were eating porridge with the focused intensity of the truly hungry. "Good morning," Hawthorne said, settling into a chair across from them. "Good morning," Tabitha replied. Her voice was still tired, but some of the desperate edge had left it. "Mr. Hayes, I have been thinking about what I owe you." "You do not owe me anything," he began, but she held up a hand. "Please let me finish. You saved our lives yesterday." "I know that is not an exaggeration. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened to us. I also know that the help you gave cannot be the end of it. I am not stupid, Mr. Hayes. I know what kind of position I am in. A woman alone in a mining town with 2 children and no husband. I have perhaps $30 to my name. That will pay for this room for maybe 2 weeks if I am frugal. After that." She paused, swallowing hard. "After that, I do not know what I will do." Hawthorne waited. He could see she had more to say. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that I will understand if the answer is no, but I have to ask, because I have run out of options." She met his eyes, and he saw both courage and fear in her gaze. "Would you consider staying in Auray long enough to help me find my feet? I'm not asking you to take care of us permanently. Just long enough for me to find work, maybe a more permanent place to stay. A few weeks, perhaps a month. I can pay you not much, but whatever I can manage." "And if the answer is no?" Hawthorne asked quietly. Tabitha's jaw tightened. "Then I will still thank you for everything you have already done, and I will figure something out. I always do." He believed her. This was a woman who had buried her husband with her own hands and then kept going. She had strength in her, even if exhaustion and grief had temporarily hidden it. "I was planning to look for work here anyway," Hawthorne said. "I will stay for a while, and you can keep your money. Use it for the children." Relief washed over Tabitha's face so completely that she had to close her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Hawthorne found work easily enough. Our array was booming with mining operations, and there was always a need for men who could handle horses and did not mind hard labor. He took a job helping to transport equipment up the mountain trails to the various mine sites. It paid decent wages and kept him close to town. Tabitha, meanwhile, began looking for work of her own. She had learned that Mrs. Patterson sometimes needed help with the boarding house, particularly with laundry and cooking. It was not much, but it earned her enough to pay for their room and meals with a little left over. More importantly, it gave her a sense of purpose beyond simply surviving. Daniel and Sarah adjusted with the resilience of children. Daniel started attending the small school that had been established in town, taught by a stern but kind woman named Miss Harper. Sarah was still too young for school, so she stayed with Tabitha during the day, helping in small ways with the boarding house chores. Hawthorne found himself drawn into their orbit almost without realizing it. He started taking his meals at the boarding house rather than at the saloon. He would sit with Daniel in the evenings, helping with his reading lessons. He taught the boy how to properly care for a horse, letting him brush down the bay mare while explaining the importance of checking hooves for stones and watching for signs of lameness. With Sarah, he was more gentle. She was shy around him at first, hiding behind her mother's skirts whenever he appeared. But gradually, she warmed to him. He carved her a small wooden horse from a piece of pine, and her delighted smile when he presented it to her did something strange to his heart. As for Tabitha, she remained polite but distant. She thanked him for his help with the children, but she never asked for more than was necessary. Hawthorne got the impression that she was afraid of being a burden, afraid of presuming too much on his kindness. But he noticed things. The way she would smile when she thought no one was watching, particularly when she looked at her children. The way she moved with unconscious grace, even when she was doing something as mundane as hanging laundry. The way her eyes would sometimes go distant and sad, and he knew she was thinking of her late husband. One evening about 3 weeks after their arrival in our array, Hawthorne was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Tabitha came out carrying 2 cups of coffee and offered him one. "May I sit?" she asked. "Of course." She settled into the chair beside him, cradling her cup in both hands. For a long moment they sat in comfortable silence. "The children are asleep," she said finally. "I cannot believe how quickly they have adjusted. Daniel loves his school. He comes home every day with new things to tell me. And Sarah has made friends with Mrs. Patterson's cat. I found her this morning trying to teach it to read from one of Daniel's primers." Hawthorne chuckled. "She is a smart little thing. She gets that from Thomas. He was always reading, always learning." Tabitha's voice softened. "He would have liked you, I think. He believed in helping people and doing what was right even when it was hard. He sounds like a good man." "He was." She paused. "I want to tell you something. I have not talked about this with anyone, but I think you deserve to know." She took a breath. "When Thomas got sick, I knew almost right away that it was bad. He knew it too. On his last day, when he was lucid enough to speak, he told me something. He said that his greatest regret was leaving us unprotected. He said he wished he had been stronger, braver, more capable of keeping us safe. I told him that he had kept us safe, that he had given us love, and that was more important than anything. But I do not think he believed me." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not sob. It was the quiet crying of someone who had done too much of it to have any drama left. "I think about that moment a lot," she continued, "because I understand now what he felt, the helplessness." The knowledge that the people you love are vulnerable and there is nothing you can do about it. When those men surrounded us on the trail, when I realized I could not fight them all, could not protect my babies, I understood exactly how Thomas felt. That is why I begged them to take the children. At least if they were gone from me, they would have a chance. She turned to look at Hawthorne, her face pale in the fading light. You did not just save our lives that day. You saved me from dying with that helplessness as my last feeling. You gave me back some measure of control, some hope that we might survive. I do not think I can ever repay that. Hawthorne set down his coffee cup. Tabitha, you do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done. No, she said firmly, not anyone. Most people would have ridden past, not wanting to get involved. Some might have stopped to help, but then they would have left us at the nearest town and considered their duty done. You did not do that. You stayed. You are still staying. Why? It was a fair question, and Hawthorne had been asking himself the same thing. The simple answer was that they needed help, and he was capable of providing it. But the more complex answer, the one he was only beginning to acknowledge, was that somewhere over the past few weeks, he had started to care about these three people. Not just in an abstract way, but specifically and personally. He liked hearing Daniel's excited chatter about school. He liked the feeling of Sarah's small hand slipping into his when they walked to the general store. He liked watching Tabitha smile. He liked the way she hummed while she worked, and the way she would tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He was starting to think of them as his family, even though he had no right to do so. I suppose, he said carefully, it is because I do not have anywhere else I need to be. Tabitha studied his face, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through his words to the truth beneath. But she did not push. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand over his, just for a moment, a simple gesture of gratitude and understanding. Well, she said softly, I am glad you are here. As autumn deepened into early winter, life in our Ray took on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Hawthorne continued his work with the mining equipment, and Tabitha expanded her role at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson, who had taken a strong liking to the young widow, began teaching her the business side of running the establishment. You have a head for this, the older woman told Tabitha one day. You could run a place like this yourself someday if you wanted. It was a future Tabitha had never considered, but she found the idea appealing. Independence, security, a life built by her own hands. The town itself was preparing for winter, which came hard and fast in the mountains. People stockpiled supplies, and there was talk of how the passes would soon be snowed in until spring. Hawthorne found himself thinking about those passes more than he probably should. Once they closed, he would be trapped in our Ray until the thaw. Not that he minded exactly. But it represented a commitment of sorts, a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. One Saturday, in mid-November, Hawthorne took Daniel fishing at a nearby creek. It was cold enough that their breath fogged in the air, but the sun was bright, and Daniel was excited enough that he did not seem to notice the chill. "Mama says you are from Texas," Daniel said as he watched his line bob in the water. "Is it true that everything is bigger there?" Hawthorne smiled. "That is what they say. Bigger sky, bigger ranches, bigger longhorn cattle. Do you miss it? Sometimes. It was home for a long time, but home is not always about a place. Sometimes it is about people." Daniel nodded as if this made perfect sense. Then, after a pause, he said, "I miss Papa." "I know you do. Mama cries sometimes at night. She thinks we do not hear her, but I do. I want to make her not sad anymore, but I do not know how." Hawthorne put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your mama is sad because she loved your papa very much. But she is also strong, stronger than you know. The sadness will get easier with time, and in the meantime, you can help just by being yourself. Nothing makes a mama happier than seeing her children thriving. You think Papa would be mad that we like you?" The question caught Hawthorne off guard. "What do you mean?" Daniel's face was serious. "I like you a lot. You teach me things and you are nice to Mama and Sarah. But Papa was our Papa. Does liking you mean I am forgetting him?" Hawthorne crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. "Daniel, listen to me. Your Papa will always be your Papa. No one can ever change that. Liking me or anyone else does not mean you are forgetting him. People have a lot of love in their hearts. There is always room for more. Your Papa would want you to be happy and safe, and he would be grateful to anyone who helped make that happen. Do you understand?" Daniel considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think so. Good. Now let us catch some fish, or your mama will think we spent the whole afternoon just talking." They did eventually catch several good-sized trout, which Tabitha cooked for dinner that evening. As they ate, Sarah chattered happily about the cat, and Daniel told his mother all about the fishing expedition. Watching them, Hawthorne felt a contentment he had not experienced in years. After the children had been put to bed, Tabitha and Hawthorne sat together in the boarding house parlor. It had become their habit these quiet evenings after the children were asleep. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. Tonight, Tabitha seemed pensive. "Daniel asked me today if it would be all right for him to care about you," she said without preamble. "He was worried it would be disloyal to his father." "He asked me something similar," Hawthorne admitted. "I told him that love is not finite. There is always room for more." "That is what I told him too." She looked at him. "I have been thinking about something, about what happens when spring comes." Hawthorne felt his chest tighten. "What about it? The passes will open again. You will be able to leave, go back to Texas or wherever else you want to go. You never signed on to stay here permanently. I know that." "What are you saying, Tabitha?" She twisted her hands in her lap. "I am saying that I do not want the children to get too attached if you are planning to leave. It is hard enough that they lost their father. I cannot let them lose someone else they have come to depend on." "And what about you?" Hawthorne asked quietly. "Are you worried about getting too attached?" She met his eyes, and in them he saw fear and longing warring with each other. "I am already attached," she whispered. "That is the problem." The admission hung in the air between them. Hawthorne felt his heart pounding. This was the moment where he could retreat back to safety or step forward into something unknown and terrifying and potentially wonderful. "I am not planning to leave," he said, "but you might. Circumstances change. You have no ties here, no real reason to stay. Then let me give you a reason." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Tabitha, these past few weeks have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. Being with you and the children, it feels like something I did not even know I was missing. I am not Thomas and I would never try to replace him. But if you would let me, I would like to stay. Not just for a few more weeks or until spring. Permanently." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. "Hawthorne, I am not sure I am ready for this. Thomas has only been gone 3 months. My heart is still so tangled up with grief. It would not be fair to you." "I am not asking you to stop grieving," he said gently. "I am just asking you to consider the possibility that someday, maybe, you might have room in your heart for something new. And in the meantime, I would like to be here. For you, for Daniel, for Sarah. As a friend, if nothing else. Just a friend." She asked, and there was something in her voice that made his pulse quicken. "For as long as that is all you want," he confirmed. She stared at their joined hands for a long moment. Then she said, "I cannot promise you anything. I do not know what I am capable of feeling right now, beyond gratitude and exhaustion. That is enough for me. You say that now, but what if months pass, years even, and I am still not ready? What if I can never be ready? Then I will be grateful for however much of yourself you are willing to share. Tabitha closed her eyes. When she opened them again, a tear traced down her cheek. You are a better man than I deserve, Hawthorne Hayes. No, he said. I am just a man who finally found something worth staying for. She squeezed his hand and they sat together in the firelight, not speaking, just existing in the same space. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. The first snow fell a week later, blanketing our ray in white. The children were ecstatic, having never seen so much snow before. Hawthorne taught Daniel how to make a proper snowball, and they engaged in a battle that left all of them laughing and covered in snow. Sarah tried to eat the snowflakes, her face turned up to the sky with pure wonder. Tabitha watched from the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her face soft with an emotion Hawthorne was beginning to recognize. It was not quite happiness yet, but it was closer than she had been. It was hope. As winter set in for real, the town transformed. The passes did indeed close, cutting our ray off from the rest of the world until spring. But rather than feeling trapped, the townspeople settled into a kind of cozy community. There were barn dances and church socials, storytelling evenings and shared meals. Tabitha was gradually accepted as one of their own, and Daniel and Sarah were absorbed into the group of town children without fanfare. Hawthorne found himself invited to Sunday dinners and poker games, included in discussions about town business and mining prospects. He had never stayed anywhere long enough to become part of a community before, and he discovered that he liked it. He liked knowing his neighbors. He liked being someone people could rely on. Christmas came, and with it, a kind of bittersweet joy. Tabitha told the children stories about their father, keeping his memory alive even as they made new traditions. Hawthorne carved more wooden toys, this time a horse and rider for Daniel, and a tiny cradle for Sarah's cloth doll. The children's delight was reward enough, but when Tabitha gave him a scarf she had knitted herself, telling him that she could not have him catching cold, he felt something in his chest expand, until it was almost painful. On Christmas night, after the children had finally been coaxed to bed, Tabitha and Hawthorne stood on the porch looking at the snow-covered mountains beneath a sky full of stars. Thomas and I were married at Christmas, Tabitha said softly. 5 years ago today, in fact. I thought this day would be unbearable being without him. And is it? Hawthorne asked. No, she said, sounding surprised. It is sad, yes, I miss him terribly. But it is not unbearable. I think he would be happy to know that we are safe, that the children are thriving, that I am not alone. She turned to face Hawthorne, and in the moonlight her face was luminous. I need to tell you something. I have been holding it back because I was afraid, but keeping silent seems more cowardly than speaking. Hawthorne waited, his heart in his throat. I care about you, Tabitha said. More than I thought I would be capable of caring about anyone again. When I think about the future now, you are in it. That terrifies me because I already lost one man I loved. I do not know if I am strong enough to survive losing another. But I also do not think I can keep pretending that you are just a friend, just someone helping us out of kindness, because it is more than that now, at least for me. For me too, Hawthorne said hoarsely. It has been more than that for a while now. I am not ready for grand gestures or promises, she continued, but I am ready to admit that this, whatever this is between us, matters. It is real, and I want to see where it might go. Hawthorne reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face gently in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, she whispered. The kiss was soft and careful, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Tabitha was smiling, really smiling in a way he had never seen before. "I did not think I would ever feel like this again," she said wonderingly. "Like what?" "Like maybe everything will be all right." The winter passed in a blur of quiet domesticity and slowly building affection. Hawthorne and Tabitha were careful around the children, not wanting to confuse them or make them feel as though their father was being replaced. But gradually, naturally, they became a family unit in ways that went beyond friendship. Hawthorne moved out of his room at the boarding house and into a small cabin on the edge of town, but he took his meals with the Morgans every day. He taught Daniel to whittle and helped him with his arithmetic. He played tea party with Sarah and her wooden animals. He fixed things that broke and helped Tabitha carry heavy loads and listened to her talk about her dreams and fears. And slowly, carefully, Tabitha began to heal. The shadow of grief that had haunted her eyes began to lift. She laughed more easily. She made plans for the future. She allowed herself to be happy. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the fire after the children had gone to bed. Tabitha was mending one of Daniel's shirts, and Hawthorne was reading a newspaper that was weeks old. "I have been thinking," Tabitha said suddenly, "about the future. About what happens when spring comes." Hawthorne set down the paper. "All right. Mrs. Patterson has offered to sell me the boarding house. Not right away, but in a year or so. She wants to go live with her sister in Denver, and she likes the idea of me taking over. It would be a good living, enough to support the children and myself comfortably." "That sounds like a fine opportunity." "It is, but there is something I would like even more." She set down her mending and looked at him directly. "I would like to have a partner. Someone to help run the business, to share the work and the decisions. Someone to build a life with." Hawthorne's mouth had gone dry. "What are you saying, Tabitha?" "I am saying that I love you." The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for so long that they could not be contained any longer. "I know it is fast, maybe too fast. I know that Thomas has not been gone even 6 months. But I also know that life is short and unpredictable, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. I love you, Hawthorne Hayes, and I want to marry you if you will have me." For a moment, Hawthorne could not speak. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her up out of her chair and into his arms. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Tabitha. I love your children. I want to spend the rest of my life taking care of all of you." Tabitha pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes shining. "You are sure? You are really sure? Because once we do this, once we make this commitment, I need to know you will not change your mind. The children cannot lose another father." "I will not change my mind," Hawthorne said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You and Daniel and Sarah, you are my family now. That is forever." She kissed him then, deeply and thoroughly, and when they finally broke apart, they were both laughing with the sheer joy of it. They told the children the next morning. Daniel was excited, if a little uncertain about the details of what it meant to have a new father. Sarah, who at 3 understood less, was mainly excited about the idea of a wedding and a party. "Does this mean you will live with us all the time?" Daniel asked. "If that is all right with you," Hawthorne replied. The boy thought about this seriously, then nodded. "I think Papa would say yes. I think he would be glad you are taking care of us." "I will do my best to make him proud," Hawthorne promised. They were married in early April, just as the snow began to melt and the first hints of green appeared on the mountainsides. It was a simple ceremony in the town church, attended by what seemed like half of our Mrs. Patterson wept happy tears and declared it the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed. Daniel stood proudly beside Hawthorne, having been given the important job of holding the rings. Sarah scattered wildflowers down the aisle with great enthusiasm. And Tabitha, wearing a dress of pale blue that Mrs. Patterson and several other town women had helped her make, was the most beautiful thing Hawthorne had ever seen. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hawthorne kissed his bride thoroughly enough to make the congregation chuckle. Then he scooped up Sarah in one arm, put his other arm around Daniel, and together with Tabitha, walked down the aisle into their new life. They took over the boarding house that summer, with Mrs. Patterson staying on for a few months to help with the transition. Hawthorne discovered that he enjoyed the work, liked meeting the various miners and travelers who passed through, liked the challenge of keeping the business running smoothly. Tabitha was brilliant at it, managing the finances and the day-to-day operations with a skill that surprised even her. Daniel thrived in school and began talking about becoming a lawyer someday. Sarah grew out of her shyness and became a chatterbox who made friends with everyone she met. They both called Hawthorne Papa now, and while Tabitha made sure they remembered their birth father, honoring his memory with stories and photographs, there was no doubt that Hawthorne had become their father in every way that mattered. 2 years after their wedding, Tabitha gave birth to a son they named Harrison, a squalling bundle of energy with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. Daniel and Sarah were devoted to their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. Hawthorne, holding his son for the first time, marveled at how much his life had changed. 3 years ago, he had been a drifter with no ties to anyone or anything. Now he had a wife he adored, 3 children he would die for, and a home that was truly his. "Are you happy?" Tabitha asked from the bed, her face tired but radiant. "More than I ever knew I could be," Hawthorne replied honestly. He sat beside her, carefully passing Harrison back to his mother, and gathered his family close. "You saved me, you know. That day on the mountain trail, you saved me just as much as I saved you. How do you figure that? Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions. I had convinced myself that I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone. But I was wrong. I needed you. I needed all of this." He gestured to encompass not just the room, but their entire life together. Tabitha smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "When I begged those men to take my children and leave me behind, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was that Daniel and Sarah would survive, even if I did not. I never imagined that I could be this happy again, that I could love someone the way I love you." "What about Thomas?" Hawthorne asked gently. It was not a question born of jealousy, but of genuine concern. He never wanted her to feel as though she had to choose between honoring her past and embracing her present. "I will always love Thomas," Tabitha said. "He gave me my first 2 children and years of happiness. But I love you too, just as deeply. They are different loves, but both are real." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Hawthorne assured her. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. The boarding house prospered, becoming known throughout the region for its fair prices and good food. Daniel did indeed become a lawyer, studying in Denver and then returning to Auray to open his own practice. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher, and went on to take over Miss Harper's position when the older woman retired. Harrison grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. When he was 8, Tabitha and Hawthorne gave him a sister, a tiny girl they named Hope, because that was what they had found together. Hope proved to be as spirited as her name suggested, fearless and funny and absolutely certain of her place in the world. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hawthorne and Tabitha sat on the porch of the boarding house, which they had long since expanded and improved. Their 4 children were inside, arguing cheerfully about something or other. In the distance, the sun was setting over the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting. "You ever think about that day?" Tabitha asked, as if reading his mind. "The day on the trail, all the time," Hawthorne admitted. "I think about how close we came to never meeting. If I had been an hour earlier or later, if I had taken a different trail, if I had decided not to get involved." "I think it was meant to be," Tabitha said. "I am not usually one for fate or destiny, but I cannot believe it was just chance that brought you to us when we needed you most." "You asked me to take your children and leave you behind," Hawthorne said. "Do you remember?" "I will never forget. It was the darkest moment of my life. I genuinely believed I was going to die, and I just wanted them to live. And I took you all home together instead." Tabitha reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," Hawthorne corrected with a smile. "The best was asking you to marry me." "I asked you," she protested, laughing. "Details." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. From inside came the sound of laughter, the sound of their children living lives that were safe and happy and full of possibility. "Thank you," Tabitha said softly. "For what?" "For not leaving me on that mountain, for taking us all home together, for building this life with me, for loving my children as your own, for giving me more children to love, for being exactly the partner I needed, even when I did not know what I needed." Hawthorne brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who had forgotten what home felt like. Thank you for teaching me that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and love. We make a good team, you and I." "The best," he agreed. Inside, they heard a crash followed by guilty silence, then Hope's voice announcing loudly that it had not been her fault. Tabitha sighed and started to get up, but Hawthorne gently pulled her back down. "Let them figure it out," he said. "Whatever broke can be fixed. Right now, I just want to sit here with my beautiful wife and count my blessings." Tabitha settled back against his shoulder with a contented sigh. "I love you, Hawthorne Hayes." "I love you too, Tabitha Hayes." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary from nearly nothing. The boarding house behind them was full of life and light and love. Their children were healthy and happy. Their marriage was strong and true. It had all begun with a scream in the wilderness and a desperate plea from a woman who thought she had nothing left to lose. But Hawthorne had not taken just her children. He had taken all of them home together. And in doing so, he had found his own home at last. Many years later, when they were old and gray, and their grandchildren played in the same boarding house rooms where their own children had grown up, Hawthorne and Tabitha would tell the story of how they met. Their grandchildren never tired of hearing it. The tale of the desperate widow and the cowboy who saved her family and ended up becoming part of it. "Tell us again about the bad men," the children would beg, eyes wide with a delicious thrill of fear tempered by the knowledge that everything had turned out all right. "Tell us about how Grandma begged you to take the children and leave her," they would say, unable to imagine their strong, loving grandmother in such desperate straits. "Tell us about how you took them all home together," they would plead, because that was their favorite part, the moment when everything changed. And Hawthorne would tell the story again, never tiring of it, because it was the story of how his life truly began. Not when he was born, but when he found the people who made living worthwhile. Tabitha would add her own details, the parts that Hawthorne could not know because he had not been inside her head. How she had been so exhausted and terrified that death had seemed almost welcome. How when he had appeared on that trail, gun drawn and determination in every line of his body, she had thought for a moment that she was hallucinating. How his simple words, "I am making it my business," had been the first kindness anyone had shown her since Thomas died. "I was ready to give up," she would tell her grandchildren. "I thought that if I could just save my babies, it would be enough. I did not think there was anything left for me. But your grandfather taught me that it is never too late for a new beginning, that broken things can heal, that love is not something you only get to have once." The grandchildren would sigh with satisfaction, storing the story away to tell their own children someday. And the story would become a family legend, passed down through generations, changing slightly in the details perhaps, but always retaining the essential truth at its heart. On a cold winter night near the end of their lives, Hawthorne and Tabitha lay in bed together, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. Outside, snow was falling again, blanketing our ray in quiet white, just as it had done for more than 30 winters since they married. "Do you have any regrets?" Tabitha asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment, honestly considering the question. "No," he said finally, "not a single one." "You, none," she confirmed. "Well, maybe one small one." "What is that?" "I wish we had more time." Another 30 years would not be enough, neither would 100. Hawthorne pulled her closer, feeling the familiar shape of her against him. "Then we will just have to make the most of however much time we have left," always the optimist. "Always," he agreed. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream. And if anyone had asked them the secret to their happiness, they would have given the same answer. Love is not just about the grand gestures or the passionate declarations. It is about showing up day after day through good times and bad. It is about choosing someone, again and again, even when it would be easier to walk away. It is about taking people home together, all of them, and building a family that is stronger than any hardship. When Hawthorne Hayes rode onto that mountain trail in the autumn of 1881, he had been a man without purpose or direction. When he rode away, he had been a man with a mission. And when he finally stopped riding, when he finally settled down and built a home, it was because he had found the one thing that made all the difference. He had found his family. Not through blood, but through choice. Through courage and compassion, and the simple act of refusing to leave anyone behind. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. Not how the story began, but how it continued, day after day, year after year, a testament to the transforming power of love and the unshakable strength of family bonds forged in adversity and maintained through devotion. The boarding house in our ray stood for generations, a landmark in the town's history. Long after Hawthorne and Tabitha had passed on, their descendants kept it running, honoring the legacy that had begun with a cowboy who had taken a desperate widow and her children home together. The house was always full of laughter and life, a place where strangers became friends and friends became family. And sometimes, on quiet autumn evenings when the light slanted golden through the mountains, people swore they could feel something special in the air, a sense of peace and belonging. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness, and that love, when it is true, can overcome any obstacle. This was the legacy of Hawthorne and Tabitha Hayes. Not wealth or fame, but something far more valuable. A family built on love. A home built on compassion. A life built on the simple principle that when someone asks you to save their children, you save them all together. Because that is what family does. That is what love does. It brings everyone home together and it keeps them there, safe and cherished forever.